in terms of money that they have in their accounts that they need to have there. And if they're all lumped together, then they're in effect borrowing it from the other accounts.
Right.
And, it's nice of us.
That's probably raise the water rates we can replenish.
So that is the case. I mean, they are temporarily borrowing the money. Water is temporarily borrowing it longer than everybody else. But that is not the intent. So the intent is to be able to either get to a point where we can provide some board action on a temporary loan, or in order to pay that back in some sort of, in some sort of time frame.
Okay, so they can even have a negative number in capital funds?
That's where the numbers are right now. We're still trying to address something.
We don't like them, but.
That's where it is right now.
Okay, so see, to me, if you have capital funds, you either have some or you don't. So how can you have negative capital funds?
Well, the issue is we collect money specifically for capital, so specifically reserved or restricted funds. So that's where you get a negative number.
That's because you're borrowing from the capital.
Because of all the things that have happened over the years, they didn't have enough funding to cover their basic costs for water. So it was just draining everything that they had.
She's Huh.
Any other public comment? On page 4? All right, moving on to page 5. Do you have any board comment or questions on page 5?
I have a question about where we don't
Yeah.
have any
Just
taxes.
that I'm not sure on each
correct?
page, yeah.
That's page 4.
It came to me after we were first talking, but you didn't ask me for any more public board comments.
I did.
Yep. Okay.
We have-
We have a comment.
Okay.
I have a comment going back to page 4. So, one thing that water does have is water has assets. So even if the cash currently may have some portion of it that appears to be negative, it's not necessarily negative in that if I'm referring to the audit report. So water and wastewater have significant assets.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like every year your household budget, okay, I'm over this month, but I have a house and I have equity in my home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as if there are not some resources there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that what we're trying to do in the last several years, it appears that there's been significant legal expenses, other expenses that have been related to some litigation that have been pulled from the water fund specifically. So, but there are significant assets that water and wastewater have.
Which means if they don't pay up in a reasonable amount of time, we could sell them off, but we can't really.
Correct.
We can sell the generator.
If this was a corporation or an actual business, then that's probably what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
It would be sold off to pay off its debt.
Mm-hmm. And forget about water. We can't do that.
Well, it could, it just wouldn't work out very well.
Well, Steinbeck, just in that last month, was almost $17,000.
Yeah.
So.
I don't doubt where the.
No, I know, but it's terrible that we're getting
I just don't want it to affect the other departments.
nailed that.
So,
Nailed with that.
A question related to the negative funding in water. Is some of that correlated to how we're accounting? In other words, has Steinbeck always been charged to water, or is it something you recently have changed, so now there's a huge hole from Steinbeck that we're now trying to fill?
So Steinbeck, just in this last year, we've paid roughly $350,000 to fight Steinbeck.
Right.
Jesus.
over the course of this whole thing, I think it's closer to 600,000 or 700,000, which really accounts for the entire deficit that we have.
What was always attributed to water specifically?
So originally, it was spread out over everybody,
That's what I thought.
but it was destroying everybody.
Mhm.
So it's kind of, you lose.
Mhm.
So that is a board decision. The last time they came to the board, it was decided to keep that cost in water because it really is a water issue.
Yes.
That's not to say that it wouldn't come back in the future and the decision be reached.
Well, isn't there's justification for doing it that way? I mean, it was that way and then it was changed back to it all being in the water fund.
And
Maybe
really,
talk about some of the reasons you wanna do it that way?
so the primary driver to keep it in the water fund, other than it being a water lawsuit specifically, is that, and this is the same thing, and same reason we got rid of the general administration, it's really hard to prove to your ratepayers how much each fund actually costs you, or each department actually costs you. And when you're going through a 218 process, if you're going through and you're saying, oh, no, we spend this much, well, prove it, and you can't, because it's spread out all over
Pulled from
everywhere,
other places, you can't.
then you're, number one, you're not meeting your obligation of proof, and two, people aren't gonna believe that. So that was partially why it was decided to keep it in water, was to keep that separate, especially since we just went through a rate study, and in the future, we're gonna have future rate increases and rate studies. So keeping it out of water, unfortunately, is a hardship for water, but it cleans it up a lot as far as how much we've spent and who's paying for it.
Sure. Thank you.
Increases wages too.
Yes, public comment.
I hope we're not getting off track, but we went back and forth with Steinbeck, and it was water, then it was interdepartmental, and now it's back to water. It's being tracked by water. So what happened when it transitioned back to water? Did water pay back the fees, or the fees to the other departments? Or did it just have a placeholder?
So the money that was spent out of the other departments, there was transfers made at that point, or journal entries or whatever you call them, to reconcile that between the departments.
Okay.
So the funds were essentially paid back by water to the other funds.
So truly, the full burden is placed on the shoulders of water, and hopefully there'll be a mechanism in place in the future to recover those funds, perhaps?
There won't be any mechanism to recover the funds. The only hope is
No.
to close this out relatively soon so that we can stop.
I don't want to get off track, but thank you.
Yeah,
The only option is for the lawsuit to end.
pretty much.
And the other part of that is, when you looked at the history and how much money it was, and the other funds being affected, the other funds have obligations, and those other funds were in bad shape, not because of any reason to do with their category, and now they're depleted in their funds for something that had nothing to do with that. So when you move in the future and you have an issue why you can't fund fire, and then they're like, well, fire got this amount of money from tax base for the purpose of functioning as fire, and we can't change those rates because they're supposed to substantiate the fund. Well, you used your money for something that wasn't intended for, basically. And so, you know, we have to justify what we're requesting for rates on taxes, and that's not a justification. So therefore, now we're short and we have no mechanism to change to fund fire.
Sure, I had to be able to read if the change was necessary.
So, I mean, on both sides of it, I mean, honestly, I think the whole thing is a heist at the law level. I don't think it's fair what they can do to a community and they don't realize the impact it's having. To me, this is just terrible, and I wish we could just be out of it.
Agreed. All right. Yes.
Mr. Dodds, what is our total infrastructure liabilities for our water and wastewater waters? Do you
By
have-
liabilities, we mean like total replacement,
Yeah, what's it gonna cost to replace the system? If we're-
probably around $1 billion a piece.
Oh, God, yeah, just have a little bit.
So, is there, because I noticed that in this report, we're talking about capital reserves in this page, where I brought it up. There's no mention of what our total liability is for all of our infrastructure, our miles of water and sewer. So we can quantify over the long run of how much money we're probably gonna need to spend in the next 40, 50 years when these pipes start failing. You know, I mean,
It's not gonna take 40 or 50 years.
I'm being optimistic because some of the lines were replaced in the
So-
past few years.
So the number, I'm not sure what page you're referring to, but the number in the capital reserve account that's our target is, it was developed as a target to be reasonably achievable. And once we're able to achieve that, then we can go for a higher target. But that was, immediately, it was to provide enough funding to replace a line, you know, maybe a mile or so, probably wouldn't even replace a mile, but maybe 4 or 5 blocks of main if we had to. Or to replace a well if we had to in an emergency. To provide just enough funding to get to that point. In the future, that's gonna have to be raised or additional funds put in there, because really, we could have an earthquake tomorrow and half of our infrastructure could crumble. And basically, we'd be handing out bottled water for an unforeseen amount of time until we can replace it.
That's with all the funds though, that's with all the stuff though, lighting, everything.
Yeah. So I mean, you can have that really with anything. The reason there's no total liability or total amount that we would have to be replacing is because you really don't know. The cost today is gonna be different from cost next month, and different from cost definitely next year, or in 5 years, or 10 years, 20 years. And your needs are changing every day.
But if we have a general idea of what it would cost to replace the system, how much the system is worth, then it would give us a basis moving forward.
Do you have the total assets?
I'm just, yeah, I was just.
$1 billion.
I'm suggesting that we need to keep it in our minds, because a lot of government agencies don't plan for these things moving forward. And then we have like Flint, Michigan, where the system just gone.
Yeah, well, that had a whole lot of factors go into it that hopefully we won't go down those roads.
The other part of that, if you look at past, and you look at the infrastructure, and then you don't lose the whole thing at one time. So you keep enough money to fix standard problems, and obviously if we had a catastrophic event,
Right.
and then we would be seeking FEMA funding or something of that nature if we were to lose major wells and things of that nature.
It would be a natural disaster, cataclysm, and we
Right.
would have to seek outside funding. We wouldn't have the burden of funding it all on our own.
Well, unfortunately, you have the burden of funding initially,
Sure.
the mitigation,
Mhm.
and then you would hopefully get funding from the state or the feds for something. But just for reference, the net investments in capital assets from our last audit for wastewater is 1.4 million, and for water is 3 million. Now bear in mind that 1.4 million doesn't include the treatment plant that's gonna be 6 million in 2 years.
Right.
Also, you know, you're probably looking at least tenfold, if not 30, 40, 50-fold increase on that to actually replace it. Because this was put in the 50s.
Okay.
Yeah, we're currently working with the county and FEMA on the hazard mitigation plan, and that makes consideration, or takes consideration for replacement of total catastrophic failure infrastructure at different levels. So there is a mechanism in place. We've been part of the hazard mitigation program in the past, but this is a more global effort. So there are things being dealt with currently.
So really, these funds are the stopgap if something bad, really bad does happen, to allow enough funding to survive. And then we'll have to move on from there. But we can't really have $10 million sitting in the bank waiting for something bad to happen.
Nice.
All right, so, we were on ward comment on page 5, we had none, is that correct? Is there any public comment on page 5? No. Moving on to page 6, do we have any board comment or questions on page 6?
Switch it.
Do we have any public comment on page 6? Yes.
Just clarification, I'm assuming the operating reserve is just like, is the money that you carry over from the previous year to keep a balance in that operating account? To make sure you have the operating money?
So in your operating account, you'll have, there's no real limit on how much money you can have in there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where all the money stops first.
Mhm.
Then, if you get to the end of the year and you have $50,000 left over, then that could be transferred to the operating reserve and would be held in the operating reserve.
Mhm.
So it's like the savings account for your checking account.
Right. So that's especially helpful, like for fire, who doesn't get their income on a regular basis. Yeah.
Comes quarterly.
Any other comments or questions on page 6 from the public? All right, moving on to page 7. Do we have any board comments or questions on page 7? Nope. Any public comments? Any public comment on page 7? They're not. All right, moving on to page 8. Are there any board comments or questions on page 8?
Wastewater Department will add minimum budget transfer 1/10 the cost proposed replacement annually through the budget process. Has that been implemented, or is it?
That's part of the budget that you're gonna see. Okay, see that part.
Is this the first year?
This will be the first year.
Okay, and are we working with the same timeline? So I guess the question really is, this is year 1, we're gonna start saving from membranes. From the existing plant as it sits, or are we accounting for this for the future plant?
This is for the future. We don't need this money for the current plan.
Very well, that was the question. Okay, any other questions on page 8 from the board? Okay, are there any public comments on page 8?
Wait,
No,
did you,
wait,
did you wanna say something?
yes, I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Okay, so